Dr. Al walked into the great hall of the Galactic Council with her head held high. Her hard outer shell clicked softly against the polished floor with each step she took. She had waited 3 long years for this moment. 3 years of studying a new species from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. 3 years of collecting data, running tests, and building her case. Today, she would present her findings to the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The council chamber was massive. It could hold representatives from over 200 species, and today, nearly all the seats were filled. The Al delegation sat to her left, their bodies covered in natural blades that could cut through stone. The Silicate Collective floated in specialized containers to her right, their crystal forms glowing with ancient intelligence. Behind them sat the warriors, her own people, proud and strong with plasma glands built into their arms and armor growing naturally from their skin. Doctor reached the central platform and activated her holographic display. A three-dimensional image of a human appeared, rotating slowly so everyone could see. The creature was pale and soft. It stood on 2 legs and had 2 arms. Its skin was smooth and thin. Its teeth were small and flat. Its fingers ended in useless little nails instead of proper claws. "Honored members of the council," Doctor began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I present to you the results of my comprehensive study of the species known as humans. They come from the 3rd planet of the Sol system, a world they call Earth." She moved her limb through the air and the hologram zoomed in on the human's hands. As you can see, humans possess no natural weapons. Their fingers end in thin keratin plates that they call fingernails. These are so weak that they break when pressed against any moderately hard surface. They cannot cut, cannot tear, cannot pierce. A soft murmur of amusement rippled through the council. The Al representative extended one of his arm blades, admiring its razor edge as if to highlight the comparison. Doctor continued, "Their teeth are equally useless for combat, flat molars designed for grinding plant matter, small front teeth that could barely break the skin of a ripe fruit. Their bite force is negligible compared to any known predator species." She changed the display to show a cross-section of human skin. "Their protective covering is perhaps the most disappointing aspect of their biology. Human skin tears easily. It bruises from minor impacts. It offers no protection against temperature extremes, radiation, or physical attack. A simple blade can slice through it with minimal effort." Elder of the Silicate Collective pulsed with soft blue light, indicating he wished to speak. "Doctor, your anatomical analysis is thorough, but I have reviewed some of their historical records. Their past shows considerable violence, wars that killed millions of their own kind, weapons that could destroy entire cities. How do you explain this?" Doctor had prepared for this question. She nodded respectfully toward the elder. "An excellent observation and one I am happy to address. Humans are indeed violent, but this violence stems from their weakness, not their strength. They build weapons because they lack natural ones. They create armor because they have no shells. They form armies because individually they are helpless." She pulled up images of human weapons. Guns, tanks, missiles. All of these are external tools, artificial enhancements to compensate for biological inadequacy. Remove their technology, strip away their machines and devices, and what remains? She gestured at the naked human hologram. Soft meat, fragile bones, a creature that any member of this council could kill with a casual gesture. The Al representative made a clicking sound that the translation system interpreted as laughter. "So they are clever builders, like the morph beetles that construct traps, still prey despite their tricks." "Exactly," Doctor agreed. "In fact, I would argue that humans are less threatening than morph beetles. At least beetles possess venomous stingers. Humans have nothing. No venom, no poison, no natural toxins of any kind. They cannot even spit acid or produce defensive odors." She spent the next hour going through more data. She showed the council how humans needed to sleep for 8 hours every day. She explained how they could only survive in a narrow range of temperatures. She demonstrated how their bodies broke down without constant food and water. She detailed their slow healing, their vulnerable organs, their dependence on oxygen. By the time she finished, the council was thoroughly convinced. Several representatives had stopped paying close attention, clearly bored by the long list of human weaknesses. In conclusion, Doctor said, I recommend that humans be classified as Category 7. This places them among the least threatening species in our records. They pose no danger to any member species of the Galactic Council. Their planet is rich in resources, and their population is large enough to provide a substantial labor force. They are perfect candidates for acquisition. General of the military forces leaned forward. He was old and from many battles, but his plasma glands still glowed with deadly power. You are certain they cannot resist. Our warriors are valuable. I will not waste them on unnecessary casualties. Doctor straightened with confidence. General, I have studied every aspect of human biology. I have analyzed their combat capabilities, their endurance, their physical limits. Without their weapons, they are less dangerous than the livestock we raise for food. Your warriors will face no challenge. This will be the easiest acquisition in Council history. The general studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. I will trust your expertise, Doctor. The vote was called. 200 species pressed their approval, not a single voice of dissent. Humanity was officially classified as Category 7, minimal threat, suitable for labor acquisition. Doctor left the chamber feeling proud. Her research would be cited in academic papers for generations. She had proven her worth to the Council. She had secured her place in scientific history. As she walked back to her laboratory, she passed a display showing images of Earth. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds. Such a pretty planet wasted on such a weak species. Soon, it would belong to the Council. Soon, the humans would learn their proper place in the galaxy. Doctor did not notice the small detail in one of the images. A group of humans gathered around a fire, their eyes reflecting the flames. Those eyes held something that cameras could capture, but that her analysis had failed to measure. Something old and patient and dangerous. The first collection ships launched 3 days later. Doctor would look back on this moment for the rest of her life. She would remember her confidence, her certainty, her absolute faith in her own research. And she would wonder how she had missed so much while studying so carefully. She had everything humans lacked. She had completely failed to understand what they possessed. That failure would cost the Council dearly, and it would cost Doctor everything she thought she knew about the universe. Commander Al stood on the bridge of her warship and looked down at the blue planet below. Earth, home of the humans, Category 7 species. This mission was an insult to her rank and abilities. She had fought in 3 wars and commanded fleets against the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Now she was sent to collect helpless primitives like some kind of farmer gathering livestock. Her ship carried 40 warriors. Each one was a perfect killing machine. Their exoskeletons could stop bullets. Their plasma glands could burn through metal. Their 4 arms could crush stone. They had been bred for war over thousands of generations. Sending them against humans was like sending a hunting beast to catch sleeping insects. Commander, her navigation officer reported, we have identified a suitable collection site. A remote settlement in a region the humans call Montana. 43 life signs. No significant technology detected. No military presence. Al made a dismissive gesture. Standard procedure. Disable their communications, establish a perimeter, sedate and collect. We should be finished before their star completes another rotation. The ship descended through the atmosphere. It was night in this part of the planet, which made things easier. The humans apparently could not see well in darkness, another weakness to add to the long list. They landed in a field near the settlement. The structures were primitive, wood and stone mostly. A few metal vehicles that looked ancient compared to Council technology. Al almost felt embarrassed for the species. How had they even survived long enough to develop basic civilization? Her warriors moved out in perfect formation. They had done this many times before on many different worlds. The sedation darts were calibrated for triple human body mass, just to be safe. One dart would put a human to sleep for hours. The collection cages were ready. The transport ship waited in orbit. The first human they encountered was an old male. His hair was gray and his face was lined with age. He was working on one of the metal vehicles despite the late hour, his hands covered in black grease. When he saw the warriors approaching, he did not run. He did not scream. He simply stood up slowly and wiped his hands on a cloth. Lieutenant or raised his dart launcher and fired. The projectile struck the human in the shoulder. Standard procedure. The human should have collapsed within 3 seconds. Instead, the old human looked down at the dart sticking out of his arm. He wrapped his fingers around it and pulled it out. He examined it briefly with an expression that the translation systems labeled as mild annoyance. Then, with a motion almost too fast to track, he threw a metal tool directly at Lieutenant Orr's head. The tool struck with tremendous force. Orr's secondary skull plate cracked. The lieutenant stumbled backward, ichor leaking from the wound. "That is not possible," the science officer whispered from beside Commander Al. "The sedative should have dropped him instantly. The dosage was calibrated for triple his mass." Before Al could respond, the old human put 2 fingers in his mouth and released a high-pitched sound. A whistle, the translation system called it. The sound echoed across the settlement. And then humans began emerging from everywhere. They came from the wooden structures, from behind vehicles, from the darkness between buildings. Some carried primitive projectile weapons, long tubes that launched metal fragments at high speed. But others came with nothing, just their bare hands and their soft, clawless fingers and their flat, useless teeth. And their eyes. Commander Al would never forget their eyes. They did not look like prey. They looked like something else entirely. Something that made her old warrior instinct scream warnings that her logical mind refused to accept. "Open fire," she commanded. "Plasma bursts put them down." Her warriors obeyed. Plasma streaked through the night, bright and hot and deadly. Humans fell, but not as many as should have fallen. And the ones who fell did not always stay down. Al watched a human female take a plasma burn across her torso. The wound was severe, flesh blackened and split. By every biological standard, she should have collapsed from shock and pain. Instead, she kept running. She reached one of the warriors and struck him in the joint between his head and thorax, exactly where the exoskeleton was weakest. The warrior fell. The woman took his weapon and turned it on the next warrior. How did she know? How did she know where to strike? 3 humans tackled another of her soldiers. They were smaller than him, weaker. Their attacks should have bounced off his natural armor, but they did not attack his armor. They attacked his eyes, his breathing holes, the soft spots under his arms. They fought with a viciousness that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside them, somewhere beyond training or thought. One human male had his arm broken. The bone snapped with a sound that Al heard clearly. He screamed in pain. And then he kept fighting with his other arm, using the broken limb as a distraction, letting it hang uselessly while he struck with all the strength of his functioning limb. This was not how Category 7 species behaved. This was not how weak creatures fought. Weak creatures ran. They surrendered. They collapsed when hurt and begged for mercy. They did not ignore mortal wounds and keep attacking with broken bones and burning flesh. "Fall back," Al shouted. "All units fall back to the ship." Her warriors obeyed, but the retreat was not clean. Humans pursued them. Humans who should have been dying continued to fight. The old male with the gray hair, the one who had started all this, appeared with a projectile weapon and began firing with deadly accuracy. 3 warriors fell before they made it back to the landing zone. They escaped with only 7 specimens. Humans they had managed to sedate and drag to the ship before the others could stop them. 7 out of 43. And in exchange, Al had lost 12 warriors, 12 soldiers, each one worth more than 1,000 humans by any reasonable measure. On the flight back to the orbital station, Al reviewed the combat footage. She watched it again and again, trying to understand what had happened. The humans had no advantages. No armor, no natural weapons, no superior technology. They should have been collected easily. But they had fought with something that her analysis could not quantify. When one human fell, others dragged them to safety. When one was cornered, others came to help, even at great risk to themselves. They communicated without speaking, anticipating each other's movements as if they shared a single mind. And they had endured. Wounds that should have stopped them did not stop them. Pain that should have broken them did not break them. They had looked at overwhelming force and deadly weapons and certain defeat, and they had chosen to fight anyway. Commander Al was old. She had seen many battles and many enemies. She had fought species with natural weapons that could tear warships apart. She had faced armies that outnumbered her forces 100-1. None of them had frightened her. But sitting in her command chair, watching the footage of humans fighting with their bare hands against plasma weapons, she felt something she had not felt in decades. She felt fear. She began writing her report to the council. They would need to know that Doctor's research was incomplete. Category 7 was wrong. Everything was wrong. The humans were not prey. And the council had just declared war on them without realizing it. Dr. Al stood in the observation room and watched the humans through reinforced glass. The specimens had arrived 2 days ago, and nothing about their behavior matched her predictions. Nothing at all. There were 7 of them, 4 males and 3 females. They ranged in age from young adult to elderly. They had been placed in standard Category 7 containment. Energy barriers surrounded their holding area. Simple food and water dispensers provided basic nutrition. Medical scanners monitored their vital signs. It was the same setup used for dozens of harmless species across the galaxy. The humans had turned it into something else entirely. Within the first hour, they had organized themselves. Doctor had expected panic, fear, perhaps attempts to escape followed by despair when those attempts failed. That was how Category 7 species behaved in captivity. Instead, the humans had gathered in a circle and talked quietly. They had examined every inch of their cell. They had tested the energy barriers repeatedly, noting exactly how much pain each shock delivered and how long the pain lasted. Then they had begun to work together in ways that Doctor struggled to understand. The oldest male, the one with gray hair who had resisted sedation, seemed to be a leader of sorts, but his leadership was strange. He did not give orders. He made suggestions, and the others considered them and sometimes disagreed. When they disagreed, they talked until they reached a decision together. It was inefficient and slow, but the result was that every human in the group understood the plan completely and was committed to following it. Research assistant entered the observation room with a data tablet. Doctor, the latest readings are concerning. All specimens show elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels. Their stress hormones have been at combat-ready levels since they arrived. Doctor clicked her mandibles in confusion. That cannot be sustained. Such biochemistry is meant for short bursts, a few hours at most. Their systems should have crashed by now. They should have, agreed, but look at this. He showed her the data. Heart rates elevated but stable, blood pressure high but controlled, muscles tense but not cramping. They are maintaining a state of constant alert. Their bodies are ready to fight at any moment, yet they are not exhausting themselves. It is as if they have learned to live in this state. That should not be biologically possible. Many things about these specimens should not be biologically possible. Doctor turned back to the observation window. The youngest of the specimens had caught her attention. A female, small and thin, with dark hair and dark eyes. According to the biometric data, she was barely an adult by human standards. She should have been the weakest and most frightened of the group. She was neither. The young female moved through the holding cell with a calm purpose that unsettled Doctor deeply. She examined everything. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, the energy emitters, the food dispensers, the waste systems. Her dark eyes tracked every guard that passed, every researcher that entered the observation room, every flicker of the lights. She was learning the facility, mapping it in her mind, looking for weaknesses. Right now she was standing at the energy barrier with her hands pressed against it. The barrier crackled and sparked. The shock should have been painful enough to discourage contact. The young female did not flinch. She pressed harder, feeling the resistance, testing the limits. "Increase barrier strength," Doctor ordered suddenly. Looked surprised but obeyed. The barrier's power output doubled. The crackling became louder. Small burns appeared on the young female's palms. She did not move her hands. She kept pressing, kept testing, even as her skin blistered. "What is she doing?" whispered. "Learning," Doctor replied quietly. A sensation was crawling through her thorax, something cold and uncomfortable. She would later learn that humans called this feeling fear. She is learning exactly how much the barrier can hurt her. She is deciding if the pain is a price she is willing to pay. The young female finally stepped back. She looked at her burned palms with no expression. Then she looked up, directly at the observation window. She could not see through it from her side. It was designed to be opaque from within the cell. But her eyes found Doctor anyway, found her and held her gaze as if the glass was not there at all. Doctor took an involuntary step backward. Over the next 3 days, the humans continued to adapt. They slept in shifts, ensuring that at least 2 of them were always awake and watching. They exercised regularly, maintaining their physical condition despite the confined space. They talked constantly, sharing information, making plans, building something that Doctor could not see but could sense growing stronger every hour. The young female became their eyes. She watched everything and reported to the others. She noticed patterns that even the facility's security systems had not been designed to detect: guard rotations, power fluctuations, the timing of meals and inspections. She had all with patient precision. On the 4th day, Doctor made a mistake. She allowed a maintenance team to repair a lighting unit in the observation room while the humans could see them. It was a minor error. The repair took only minutes. But the young female watched every moment. She saw which tools were used. She saw which panel was opened. She saw the wiring beneath. That night, the lights in the human cell flickered strangely. When security investigated, they found that the food dispenser had been partially disassembled. No one could explain how. The humans had no tools. Yet pieces had been removed and rearranged in ways that should have been impossible with bare hands. "They are testing us," Doctor said to the security chief, "probing our responses, learning how quickly we react to problems. Should we increase surveillance?" "Yes, and increase the guard rotation, and reinforce all maintenance access points within their visual range." She paused. "And do not underestimate them again. They are observing us as carefully as we are observing them, perhaps more carefully." The security chief made a sound of disbelief. "They are Category 7, soft creatures without claws or armor. What can they possibly do against us?" Doctor looked back at the observation window. The young female was sitting still now, her burned hands healing slowly, her dark eyes closed. She appeared to be sleeping, but her breathing was too controlled, too regular. She was awake. She was listening. "I do not know," Doctor admitted. "That is what frightens me." The security chief laughed at her concern. He was still laughing the next day when the power grid failed. He stopped laughing when the containment barriers dropped. And he never laughed again after what the young female did to the guards who tried to stop her. But that is a story for the next telling. For now, it is enough to say that Doctor had finally begun to understand her error. She had measured human bodies and found them wanting. She had failed to measure human minds, human will, human stubbornness in the face of impossible odds. She had failed to measure what made humans truly dangerous. And she was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. The power failure happened on the 5th day, at exactly the moment the young female had predicted it would happen. She had spent 4 days watching, 4 days learning the rhythm of the facility. She had noticed that the lights dimmed slightly every 6 hours when the backup generators cycled. She had seen that the energy barriers flickered during these transitions. She had counted the seconds. She had measured the weakness. And she had found a way to make it worse. The food dispenser she had partially disassembled was connected to the same power grid as the barriers. The modifications she had made, using nothing but her fingers and her will, created a tiny short circuit, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to add stress to an already strained system. When the generators cycled on the 5th day, the combined load was too much. The power grid stuttered, the barriers flickered, and for exactly 2.3 seconds they dropped completely. The young female was already moving before the barriers fell. She had been standing in position for an hour, waiting, her body coiled like a spring. The moment the energy field disappeared, she ran. Not blindly. She knew exactly where to go. 4 days of observation had shown her the path to the security hub. She had memorized every turn, every corridor, every door. She ran with purpose and precision, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. The old male with gray hair was right behind her, moving fast despite his age. The others spread out, each heading to a different part of the facility. They had planned this together during their whispered conversations. Each human had a role. Each human knew what to do. The young female reached the first intersection and turned left. 2 guards stood in the corridor ahead. Warriors, each one twice her size, each one armed with a plasma lance that could burn through metal. They saw her coming. They raised their weapons. They were not worried. She was small and unarmed and soft. She was Category 7. She was nothing. She proved them wrong in 4 seconds. The first guard fired his plasma lance. The young female dropped low, sliding under the beam of burning energy. She came up inside his reach, too close for him to aim. Her hands found the joint between his helmet and his thorax armor. Human anatomy charts said her fingers lacked the strength to damage exoskeleton. The charts were wrong. She did not try to crush the armor. She found the gap, the tiny space where the plates met. Her fingers drove into that gap like blades, finding the soft tissue beneath. The guard screamed. His plasma lance clattered to the floor. The young female grabbed it as she spun past him, turning to face the second guard. This one was ready. He fired before she could aim her stolen weapon. The plasma beam caught her across the shoulder. Skin and muscle burned away, exposing the white bone beneath. The pain must have been beyond description. She did not stop. She made a sound, a short, sharp breath that might have been a scream swallowed before it could escape. Then she swung the plasma lance like a club, striking the guard's arm and knocking his weapon aside. Before he could recover, she stepped close and wrapped her arms around his head. Necks were strong, protected by thick exoskeleton and powerful muscles. But they were also designed for a creature that walked upright and carried its head high. The young female twisted with her entire body weight, using leverage instead of strength, using physics instead of muscle. The guard's neck broke with a sound like cracking stone. The young female stood over his body, breathing hard. Blood ran freely from her wounded shoulder. The exposed bone gleamed wetly in the corridor lights. She looked at the wound, assessed it quickly, and decided it was not immediately fatal. Then she kept moving. The security hub was 50 meters ahead. She could see the door at the end of the corridor. Behind her, she could hear fighting. The other humans were engaging guards throughout the facility, drawing attention, creating chaos, buying her time. She reached the security hub door. It was locked. Of course it was locked. This was the nerve center of the facility, where all the containment systems were controlled. It would have the strongest security. The door itself was reinforced metal, impossible to break through, but the lock was something else. An old backup system, used only during power failures. A simple physical lock made of steel. A padlock. Doctor had placed it there personally. She believed in redundant security. She knew that during power failures, electronic locks could not be trusted. Steel was reliable. Steel was strong. No Category 7 species could break steel with their bare hands. The young female looked at the padlock. Her burned hand still carried blisters from testing the energy barrier. Her shoulder wound was still bleeding. Her fingers were not designed for this. Human anatomy clearly showed that the bones in human hands were small and fragile, unsuited for applying tremendous force. She gripped the padlock anyway. The steel was cold against her palms. She positioned her hands carefully, one on each side of the lock. She planted her feet. She took a deep breath. And she pulled. Nothing happened at first. The steel did not move. Her muscles strained. Her wounded shoulder screamed in protest. Blood ran down her arm and dripped onto the floor. She pulled harder. Something in her hand cracked. A small bone, perhaps. The pain shot up her arm like fire. Her vision blurred. Her body begged her to stop, to let go, to accept that this was impossible. She did not stop. She pulled with everything she had. She pulled with her arms and her back and her legs. She pulled with her anger at being captured. She pulled with her fear for the people trapped in the cells behind her. She pulled with a stubborn refusal to accept defeat that went beyond biology, beyond anatomy, beyond anything that could be measured or. The steel began to groan. Metal is strong. Metal is hard. Metal does not yield to soft flesh and fragile bone. Every principle of physics and material science agreed on this point. But the young female did not care about physics. She did not care about material science. She cared only about the people in those cells. Her people. The ones who had fought beside her, who had trusted her, who were counting on her to free them. She would not fail them. The padlock began to bend. The steel screamed as it deformed, twisted by a force that should not have existed. The young female's hands were bleeding now, skin torn away, bones grinding against each other. She could feel things breaking inside her fingers, small bones shattering under the impossible strain. She did not stop. With a final shriek of surrendering metal, the padlock tore apart. The two halves fell to the floor, twisted and ruined. The young female stumbled forward, catching herself against the door. Her hands were destroyed, fingers bent at wrong angles, blood pooling beneath her. She looked at the damage, she assessed it, she decided it did not matter. She pushed the door open and entered the security hub. The controls were simple, large buttons designed for quick use during emergencies. She could not use her hands anymore. They did not work, so she used her elbow, pressing the button marked with the symbol for general release. Throughout the facility, every containment cell opened at once. The young female leaned against the console, finally allowing herself a moment of rest. Her shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, the body's desperate attempt to save itself. Her hands hung useless at her sides. She was badly hurt, perhaps dying. But she was smiling. Behind her, she could hear her people moving through the corridors, free now, fighting their way toward escape. She had done what she needed to do. She had paid the price willingly. Doctor found her there 20 minutes later, after the fighting had moved to other parts of the facility. The scientist stood in the doorway of the security hub and stared at the young female, stared at the blood on the floor, stared at the ruined padlock still lying where it had fallen. "How?" Doctor whispered. "That should have been impossible." The young female looked up at her with dark eyes that held no fear, no regret, no surrender. only a quiet certainty that Doctor would never fully understand. "Those were my people in those cells," the young female said simply. As if that explained everything. As if there had never been any other possible choice. Doctor looked at the broken steel and the broken hands and the unbroken will, and she finally understood how badly she had failed. She had measured what humans lacked. She had never thought to measure what they would sacrifice for each other. That was her greatest mistake. And she would spend the rest of her life trying to make the galaxy understand it. The rescue fleet arrived too late. By the time the Council's warships reached the facility, the battle was already over. Dr. Al stood in the ruins of what had been the most secure research station in the sector. Bodies lay in the corridors. Warriors, trained killers with natural armor and plasma weapons, had fallen to creatures with soft skin and no claws. The containment cells stood empty. The security hub was dark, its systems destroyed to cover the escape. The 7 human specimens were gone. They had stolen a transport ship from the facility's docking bay, but they had not simply escaped. They had taken hostages. 12 research staff members were missing, including Doctor herself. The humans had captured her during the chaos of the escape, dragged her aboard the stolen ship, and kept her alive for reasons she did not understand. For 3 cycles, she was their prisoner. They could have killed her. They could have tortured her for information. They could have treated her the way the Council treated Category 7 species. They did none of these things. Instead, they talked to her. The old male with gray hair sat with her and explained things. He told her about Earth, about human history, about the wars and the peace and the long struggle to become something better. He told her about families and children and the lengths to which humans would go to protect the people they loved. The young female visited her too after her wounds had been treated. Her hands were wrapped in bandages. The doctors among the humans had done what they could, but the damage was severe. She might never have full use of her fingers again. She did not seem to regret it. "Why did you let me live?" Doctor asked her one night. "I am the one who classified your species. I am the reason the Council came for your people." The young female looked at her with those dark, measuring eyes. "You made a mistake. Mistakes can be corrected. Death cannot." "Your hands," Doctor said. "The padlock. How did you do that? Our scientists say it should have been impossible." The young female looked down at her bandaged hands. She was quiet for a long moment. "When I was young," she finally said, "my grandmother told me a story. A mother lifted a car to save her child, a machine that weighed thousands of kilograms. She lifted it with her bare hands because her child was trapped underneath. No one could explain how. The doctors said it was impossible, but the child lived." She looked up at Doctor. "We are not limited by what is possible. We are limited by what we are willing to do. That padlock was between me and my people, so it had to break. It was that simple." Doctor did not know how to respond to this. Everything she understood about biology and physics, but she had seen the broken steel with her own eyes. She could not deny what had happened. After 3 cycles, the humans released their hostages at a neutral trading post. Doctor was returned safely to Council space. She was examined by doctors, debriefed by security, and finally brought before the Galactic Council to explain what had happened. She stood in the same great hall where she had given her original presentation. The same representatives watched from the same seats, but everything had changed. "I was wrong," Doctor said. The words came hard, but she forced them out. Her reputation was already destroyed. Her position was already lost. She had nothing left to protect except the truth. "My analysis was anatomically correct but fundamentally flawed. I what humans lack. I failed to what they possess." She activated a new holographic display. Not anatomy this time. Behavior, combat footage, psychological profiles, recordings from the facility's security systems showing impossible things. Humans lack claws, so they learn to use their entire bodies as weapons. They lack armor, so they developed the ability to continue functioning through damage that would stop any other species. They lack venom, so they learn to identify and exploit the weaknesses of any creature with a nervous system. She showed the footage of the young female fighting the two guards. The council watched in uncomfortable silence as a creature half their size killed two trained warriors in seconds. But what they possess is far more dangerous. Doctor pulled up the footage of the padlock. The young female's hands gripping steel, the metal bending, deforming, tearing, the blood on the floor and the broken bones and the will that refused to yield. They can choose to ignore their own pain, their own injuries, their own survival instincts. They can decide that something matters more than their own lives. And when they make that decision, they become capable of things that no biological model can predict. The owl representative shifted nervously. His natural blades, so impressive before, suddenly seemed less remarkable. What good were claws against a creature that would destroy its own body to reach you? I asked the female why she fought so hard, Doctor continued. Why she destroyed her own hands to break that lock. She said, "Those were my people in those cells." As if that explained everything, as if there was no other possible choice. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. And that is what makes them truly dangerous. They form bonds with each other that transcend individual survival. They will sacrifice themselves for their group without hesitation. They will face impossible odds and refuse to surrender. They will tear steel apart with their bare hands if that is what it takes to protect the people they love. Elder of the Silicate Collective pulsed with agitated light. What do you recommend, Doctor? How do we contain such a species? Doctor was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the young female, about the old male and his patient explanations, about the way the humans had treated her during her captivity. They could have been cruel. They had chosen to be kind. We do not contain them, she said finally. We do not engage them. We leave them alone on their little blue planet and hope they do not come looking for us. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the council. I am formally requesting that humanity be reclassified, Doctor continued. Not Category 7, not any existing category. I recommend we create a new classification. Do not engage, under any circumstances. General, who had lost 12 warriors in a single night, spoke up. You are suggesting we retreat, that we admit defeat to a species with no claws. Doctor turned to face him directly. I am suggesting that we recognize reality. We sent 40 warriors to capture a village of farmers. We lost 12. We captured 7 specimens. We lost an entire research facility trying to hold them. One of them broke a steel padlock with her bare hands. Another resisted sedation designed to drop a creature 3 times his size. She let that sink in. These were ordinary humans, farmers and laborers from a small settlement. They were not soldiers. They were not trained warriors. They were regular members of their species. If this is what ordinary humans can do, what could their military accomplish? What would their special forces be capable of? The council chamber was very quiet. I have studied many species, Doctor said. I have never encountered anything like humans. They are not the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced, but they possess something that cannot be measured, something that makes them more dangerous than species with 10 times their natural weapons. What is that? Elder asked. Doctor remembered the young female's eyes, the quiet certainty, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. They do not know when to stop, she said. They do not understand that something is impossible, and they will sacrifice anything for each other, anything at all. The vote was called. 200 species pressed their approval, just as they had before. But this time, the vote was unanimous in a different direction. Humanity was officially reclassified as do not engage. The collection ships were decommissioned. The invasion plans were deleted. The Galactic Council turned its attention to other worlds, other species, other opportunities that did not involve creatures who could tear steel with their bare hands. Doctor returned to her laboratory, but she never studied another species again. Instead, she spent her remaining years writing warnings, detailed accounts of everything she had witnessed, records of human capabilities that biological explanation, pleas for future generations to remember what she had learned. Somewhere in the galaxy, a stolen transport ship carried 7 humans back toward Earth. Their wounds healed, their stories spread. The young female's hands would never work quite right again, but she did not regret what she had done. She had freed her people. She had proven something important. Not all weapons are made of metal. Not all armor is made of scales. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is a soft creature with no claws who simply refuses to give up. The humans had no idea that they had just won a war they never knew they were fighting. They returned to their lives, to their families, to their ordinary routines on their ordinary world. But the galaxy remembered, and it learned to be afraid.